The flight from London landed in Malaga at 9:15 in the morning. Nina Hoffman was traveling alone, 38, a journalist from Hamburg who had been assigned a story about European tourism economies and had chosen Spain because Spain, in 2025, is the story. The most visited country in Europe, the second most visited in the world. 94 million international arrivals in 2024, a number so large it exceeds the country's own population by twice. She collected her bag, walked through arrivals, and stepped into the Costa del Sol sunshine. The terminal was new. The road from the airport was new. The hotel, a four-star property in Malaga's revitalized historic center, where a decade ago there had been empty shop fronts and peeling facades, was beautifully renovated, staffed by young people who spoke four languages and smiled with the practiced warmth of an industry that has learned exactly what foreign visitors need to feel welcome. Perfect, she wrote in her notebook. All of it, perfect. She spent 3 days in Malaga. Then she rented a car and drove north, away from the coast, away from the tourist infrastructure, into Andalusia's interior, through olive groves and white villages, and landscapes of such austere beauty that she stopped twice just to stand in them and feel the silence. In a town called Lucena, population 40,000, she stopped for coffee. The bar was half empty on a Tuesday morning. The man behind the counter was 53, heavy-set, with the careful movements of someone managing a bad back. His name was Antonio. He had worked in this bar for 22 years. His son, he said, had left for Barcelona 3 years ago. His daughter was in Germany. "And you?" Nina asked. "Do you think about leaving?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Where would I go?" he said. "This is my bar." He said it without self-pity, without bitterness, with the flat resignation of someone who has already had this conversation with himself many times and arrived at the same answer each time, not because it is the right answer, but because it is the only one available. Nina wrote it down. Outside, the olive groves stretched to the horizon, millions of trees, some of them centuries old, producing oil that would be bottled and labeled and sold in the supermarkets of Hamburg and Amsterdam and Tokyo under Italian brand names because Spanish producers have never quite mastered the art of charging what their product is worth. Two Spains, 40 minutes apart by car. One of them the world comes to visit, one of them the world never sees. This is a film about both of them, about a country that has built one of the most successful tourism economies in human history and is now discovering that success at the surface can coexist with stagnation beneath it. About the gap between the Spain on the postcard and the Spain in Antonio's bar. And about whether a country can grow at two speeds indefinitely before the tension between them becomes something that cannot be managed. To understand what Spain has built, you have to understand that it did not happen by accident, and it did not happen overnight. Spain's emergence as a tourism superpower began, improbably, under Francisco Franco, the dictator whose 40-year rule ended only in 1975, and whose economic legacy is complicated in ways that Spanish society is still processing. In the late 1950s, facing an economy close to collapse, Franco's technocrats made a decision that would define the country for the next 7 decades. Open the coast to foreign visitors and build the infrastructure to receive them. The Costa del Sol, the Costa Brava, the Balearic Islands, the Canary Islands. The developments that transform fishing villages into resort towns happen fast, chaotically, and with little regard for aesthetics or sustainability. The concrete hotels that went up in the 1960s and 1970s were not beautiful, but they were there, and they were cheap. And Northern Europeans, British, German, Scandinavian, Dutch, discovered that Spain offered something their own climates could not: reliable sun, affordable food, accessible beaches, and a culture warm enough to feel foreign, but familiar enough to feel safe. That formula, refined over decades, has become one of the most effective economic machines in the modern world. Today, Spain's tourism sector contributes approximately 13% of GDP, higher than any other large European economy, and comparable to some of the most tourism-dependent small island states. In peak months, tourists in certain Spanish cities outnumber residents by ratios that have begun to generate genuine social conflict. Barcelona, Seville, Malaga, Palma de Mallorca, San Sebastián, places whose infrastructure, housing markets, and daily life are now shaped as much by the demands of visitors as by the needs of the people who live there. The numbers behind the numbers are even more striking. Tourism, directly or indirectly, employs roughly 13% of the Spanish workforce, more than 2 million people. It generates foreign exchange that helps finance a current account that would otherwise be under significant pressure. It funds tax revenues that support a welfare state serving 60 million people. It is, in the most literal economic sense, what keeps large parts of Spain running. And it is extraordinarily good at what it does. Spain has invested over decades in the infrastructure of welcome, airports that are modern and efficiently run, high-speed rail networks connecting major cities at standards that rival Japan's, hotel capacity covering every price point from budget hostels to ultra-luxury paradors in restored medieval castles. It has built a food culture, tapas, pinchos, Michelin-starred restaurants, local markets, regional wine traditions, that has become a destination in itself, generating culinary tourism that attracts a different and higher-spending visitor than the sun and beach model of the Franco era. Nina saw all of this in her 3 days in Malaga. She saw it working, beautifully, efficiently, lucratively working. Then she got in the car and drove north, and saw something else entirely. The distance between Malaga's beachfront and Lucena's bar is 40 minutes by car and approximately 30 years by economic development. This is not metaphor. It is, as closely as economic geography can produce one, a fact. Spain's regional inequality is among the highest in the European Union, higher than Germany's, higher than France's, comparable in some measures to the Italy of North versus South, that has preoccupied Italian economists for a century. The gap between the country's most productive regions, Madrid, the Basque Country, Catalonia, the coastal tourism belts, and its least productive, Extremadura, parts of Andalusia's interior, Castilla-La Mancha, rural Murcia, is not narrowing. In some measures, it is widening. This divergence has a structural logic that tourism, for all its success, has tended to reinforce rather than correct. Tourism generates economic activity intensely concentrated in specific places: coasts, historic city centers, airport corridors, ski resorts. It creates employment that is heavily seasonal, often informal, frequently low-skilled, and structurally resistant to the kind of wage growth that would allow workers to build assets and accumulate savings over a working life. A hotel chambermaid in Benidorm earns roughly the same in real terms as her predecessor earned 20 years ago. A restaurant worker in Barcelona may earn more in season than in the interior year-round, but she will also pay Barcelona rents that have risen at a rate her wages have not followed. Tourism also has a tendency to crowd out other economic activity in the places it concentrates. Housing in Barcelona's historic neighborhoods has become so expensive, driven partly by short-term rental platforms that convert residential apartments into tourist accommodation, that the nurses, teachers, bus drivers, and administrative workers who keep the city functioning are being pushed to its periphery or out of it entirely. The city functions for visitors. It is increasingly difficult for the people who serve those visitors to live in it. Meanwhile, in the interior regions where tourism does not reach in significant volume, the structural problems of the Spanish economy that predate the tourism boom remain essentially unaddressed. Agricultural productivity in Andalusia's interior is constrained by land concentration patterns. Large estates, latifundios, owned by a relatively small number of families that have their roots in the Reconquista and have survived every political change since. Industrial capacity is limited. Infrastructure outside the high-speed rail corridors that connect major cities is often inadequate. And young people with education and ambition leave. For Madrid, for Barcelona, for Berlin, for London, because the opportunities are there and not here. Antonio's son went to Barcelona. His daughter went to Germany. This is not a personal story. It is a data point in a demographic pattern that is draining the interior of the human capital it would need to diversify and grow. Spain's youth unemployment rate, though significantly lower than its peak of 55% during the 2008 to 2013 crisis, remains among the highest in the EU, around 28% in the most recent data, and is dramatically higher in certain interior regions than in the coastal and metropolitan zones. Nina spent a day in Córdoba, a city of 320,000 people, extraordinary Roman and Moorish heritage, a UNESCO World Heritage Center that draws visitors from every country on Earth, and a youth unemployment rate that was, when she checked, above 30%. She stood in front of the Mezquita, the great mosque cathedral, built and rebuilt over 12 centuries, one of the most magnificent buildings in Europe, and watched tour groups from 15 countries file past her. How much of this, she wrote, actually stays here? It is a good question. Tourism revenue in Spain is substantial, but its distribution across the economy is uneven in ways that the aggregate figures obscure. VAT receipts, hotel taxes, and airport fees flow to central and regional governments. But the supply chains of mass tourism, food procurement, linen services, technology platforms, booking systems, are often controlled by international companies whose profits leave the country. The local bar, the small restaurant, the family-owned hotel, these capture a share, but not a controlling one. The olive oil in Antonio's bar comes from groves that his grandfather's generation planted. It is extraordinarily good, some of the best in the world. It is sold in bulk to Italian bottlers who label it, mark it up, and sell it across Europe under Italian branding at prices that Antonio's suppliers will never see. Spanish quality, he says when Nina asks about it. Italian prices. He shrugs. He has been shrugging about this for 22 years. In the summer of 2024, something happened in several Spanish cities simultaneously that took international observers slightly by surprise. Residents of Barcelona, Malaga, the Canary Islands, and Mallorca took to the streets, not in small numbers but in tens of thousands, to protest against the volume and the model of tourism that had come to define their cities and their coastlines. The signs they carried ranged from the pointed to the explicit. Tourists go home. This is not a theme park. We want to live here, not serve here. The protests were not anti-foreign. They were not xenophobic. They were something more specific and more interesting. The expression of a social contract under pressure. The implicit agreement that had underwritten Spain's tourism economy, that local populations would accept the noise, the crowding, the rising rents, the seasonal rhythms, and the service sector employment that tourism brought, in exchange for the economic activity it generated, was being renegotiated, loudly, in public. This renegotiation has structural roots that policy cannot easily address. Barcelona's housing crisis is not separable from its tourism crisis. The city has more than 15,000 short-term rental licenses, Airbnb-style accommodation, concentrated in its most desirable neighborhoods, directly competing with the housing stock that residents need. The city government has attempted to cap licenses, restrict new registrations, and eventually announced a plan to eliminate short-term tourist rentals in residential buildings entirely by 2028. Whether this will be implemented and whether implementation will be effective remains genuinely uncertain. The Canary Islands, 8 volcanic islands in the Atlantic, whose entire economic identity has been built around tourism for 60 years, are grappling with a version of the same problem at existential scale. The islands receive roughly 14 million visitors per year for a resident population of approximately 2.2 million. The infrastructure, the water systems, the coastal ecosystems, and the labor market are all under pressures that the tourism model, designed for a different era and a smaller volume, was not built to absorb. A moratorium on new hotel construction was implemented in 2024. Whether it will hold and what replaces the tourism revenue if it succeeds in limiting growth are questions without clear answers. Geopolitically, Spain's tourism dependency creates a different kind of vulnerability, one that the pandemic made brutally obvious. In 2020, when borders closed and planes stopped flying, Spanish GDP fell by 10.8%, the largest contraction in the Eurozone and one of the steepest in Spain's modern economic history. Countries with more diversified economic bases contracted less. Countries with stronger industrial sectors recovered faster. Spain's exposure was the direct mathematical consequence of having built an economic model in which 13% of GDP and 13% of employment depend on people from other countries choosing to travel. The pandemic was an extreme case, but climate change may prove a slower and more intractable version of the same vulnerability. Southern Spain's average temperatures are rising at rates significantly above the European mean. Summers that were already hot are becoming, in some coastal regions, genuinely uncomfortable for the northern European visitors who constitute the core of the tourism market. Water scarcity, already a structural constraint in much of Andalusia, Murcia, and the Canary Islands, is intensifying. The ski industry in the Sierra Nevada is retreating up the mountain as snow seasons shorten. The coast that the 1960s resort developers chose for its reliable sunshine may, within a generation, be choosing between the reliability of that sunshine and the comfort of the visitors who come for it. Nina thought about all of this on her last evening in Spain, sitting outside a bar in Seville with a glass of manzanilla and the mild October air that makes Seville in autumn one of the most pleasurable places in Europe to sit outside and think. Around her, tourists from a dozen countries were doing the same thing she was doing, eating tapas, drinking wine, photographing the narrow streets, feeling, as visitors to Seville reliably do, that they have found something, a pace, a warmth, a relationship between food and company and time of day that their home cities do not offer. She could not argue with the feeling. She felt it herself. The product is real, she wrote. The pleasure is genuine. The problem is not that Spain sells something false. The problem is that selling it so well has become the whole strategy. And strategies that work too well have a way of becoming traps. Spain is not finished. And, unlike the German or Italian versions of that sentence, it does not feel like a reassurance. It feels like a starting point. Because Spain, at the national level, is in many respects doing well. Its economy grew at roughly 3% in 2024, faster than Germany, faster than France, faster than Italy, faster than the Eurozone average. Its unemployment rate, while still high by Northern European standards, has fallen steadily from the catastrophic peaks of the crisis years. Its public finances, though strained, are more stable than they were a decade ago. Its export sector, cars, chemicals, agriculture, services, is competitive and growing. The question is not whether Spain is succeeding. The question is whether the success is the right kind. Whether growth driven primarily by tourism can build the diversified, resilient, regionally equitable economy that 60 million people need over the coming decades. Whether the Spain of Malaga's renovated hotel and Antonio's half-empty bar can find a relationship with each other that is more dynamic and more just than the one that currently exists. There are genuine attempts to answer this. Spain's PNRR, its European Recovery Fund allocation of approximately 70 billion euros, is directed significantly toward industrial transformation, digital infrastructure, green energy, and vocational training. Iberdrola, the Spanish energy company, is one of the world's largest renewable energy operators, investing in wind and solar across 5 continents, building a global clean energy business from a base in Bilbao. The Basque country's industrial model, dense, cooperative, high-skilled, export-oriented, proves that a different economic structure is possible within Spain's borders. But structural change is slow, and tourism is fast. Tourism generates revenue this quarter. Industrial diversification generates it in 10 years. The political economy of that time difference is difficult everywhere. In Spain, where regional governments control significant economic policy, and where the tourism industry is a major employer and political constituency, it is particularly so. The tension will not resolve itself. It will be resolved, or not, by choices about land use, housing policy, education, infrastructure investment, and the willingness to accept short-term costs for long-term gains. These are not economic questions, they are political ones. And Spanish politics, fractured between national and regional governments, between coalition partners with conflicting priorities, between a country that remembers crisis and a country that has never known anything else, is not currently organized to make them easily. On a Wednesday morning, Nina Hoffman drives back to Malaga Airport. She passes through the coast, the hotels, the promenades, the beaches where October sun still brings visitors from Britain and Germany in numbers that have barely declined from August. The machine is running, smoothly, visibly, at scale. She takes the inland road for the last stretch. In Lucena, she stops at Antonio's bar. He is there. Of course he is there. She orders coffee. He makes it without asking how she wants it. He remembers from 3 days ago that she takes it with milk. "Are you writing about us?" he asks, setting the cup down. "Trying to," she says. He nods. He wipes the counter with a cloth in the slow arc of someone who has wiped this counter 10,000 times. "Tell them we're here," he says. "Tell them there's more of us than there are of them." He means more Antonios than hotel lobbies, more Lucenas than Malagas, more of the Spain that the tourist map doesn't show than the Spain it does. He may be right. Whether the economy will catch up with that arithmetic is the question that Spain is living with, loudly, politically, imperfectly, in the way that only democracies with genuinely conflicting interests can live with unresolved questions. Nina gets back in the car. Behind her, Antonio wipes the counter again. Outside, the olive groves do what they have always done: produce, quietly and without recognition, something extraordinary that the world consumes without quite knowing where it comes from. The airport is 40 minutes away. The distance, in every other sense, is considerably greater.